Why you're so exhausted. A survivor's explanation. You're exhausted not because there's something wrong with you, but because your body and mind have been fighting for your life for far longer than anyone around you realizes. And you weren't just surviving everyday stress, you were surviving a system of false relating that demanded the loss of your real self. Let's name it plainly. You're not tired because you're weak. You're tired because you've been living with a traumatized nervous system, a fragmented sense of self, and a world that has no language for what happened to you. Mirrored psychic inversion theory helps survivors understand what's actually going on beneath the surface of the exhaustion, the fog, the shutdown, the internalized rage, the collapse, and the isolation. So let's walk through it. You're exhausted because you've been in survival mode. Most people think of survival mode as a short term stress response, something that turns on when there's a crisis and then switches off when it's over. But if you were raised by an emotionally unpredictable parent or have lived in narcissistic relationships, your body never turned off. MPIT names this early imprint as the annihilatory stress response. It's not just anxiety, it's the body's belief that if I'm not perfect, attuned, silent, helpful, or invisible, I will be annihilated. This isn't dramatic. This is what the infant body feels when attunement fails and the parent's face brings fear instead of safety. And if your system never knew safety, it never stopped bracing. You're exhausted because your body doesn't know what rest is. You're exhausted because you're always bracing for what might go wrong. Even if things are better now, you may find that your body is still waiting for something to go wrong. A look, a message, a silence, a delay, a conversation where you misread the tone and spiral. This is what MPIT calls the anticipatory shadow reflex. You learn to scan people's faces, read their tone, manage their moods. You learn to hide your own feelings, speak carefully, apologize when you hadn't done anything wrong. You became so good at surviving that it passed as coping. But it wasn't coping, it was constant, silent bracing. You're exhausted because your whole system is still preparing for the next abandonment. You're exhausted because your sense of self was broken into pieces. This is something almost nobody explains well. When narcissistic abuse breaks you, it doesn't just hurt your feelings, it shatters your sense of self. You start to become many selves. The mute version of you who can't speak, the version trying to be perfect, hoping to be loved, the angry one who finally sees what happened, the numb one who floats through the day, the real you somewhere underneath it all, unsure if they're even allowed to exist. This inner fragmentation is more than disassociation. MPIT calls this collapse induced psychotic regression. A scary name, but not a judgmental one. It simply means that under immense psychological pressure, the mind regresses into a survival architecture where different parts of the self take over to protect what remains. You're exhausted because you're carrying too many selves inside you, and they're all trying to survive. You're exhausted because you're simulating connection instead of feeling it. One of the most painful effects of long term narcissistic abuse is this: you learn to mimic connection. You become someone who can look okay, you know how to smile, nod, help, speak kindly. You can even seem emotionally open. But underneath it all, you're not there, not fully. This happens because in narcissistic systems, connection was unsafe. It had to be earned, contorted, faked. You were loved when you were useful, needed, silent, agreeable, or when you mirrored back what the other person needed to see. So now, even when you're with good people, you may still feel alone, or anxious, or flat, or like you're watching yourself from the outside. MPIT calls this inverse mirrored reflexive apathy, a structure where the self is still engaged in simulated connection, but has withdrawn affectively. You're playing a role, not living a truth. You're exhausted because you're performing safety instead of feeling it. You're exhausted because you keep looking outside for proof that you matter. This one is hard, important. One of the reasons survivors collapse again and again is because they're still reaching outward to be seen, understood, mirrored, validated. It's natural. You should have been seen, but the truth is, your healing can't come from the same kind of mirroring that broke you. MPIT explains this as the difference between the horizontal axis, relating to others, and the vertical axis, relating to truth. When you live horizontally, through the gaze, approval, or presence of others, you're always anticipating the danger of collapse. The vertical is different. It's you witnessing yourself. It's stillness. It's the voice that says, I know what I've been through, and I don't need to convince anyone. You're exhausted because you're trying to prove your truth to people who can't or won't see you. You're exhausted because you had no pause. You've likely been moving non-stop in your body or in your mind. Maybe you isolate, maybe you ruminate, maybe you work too hard, maybe you're still stuck in brain fog. But still, there's no pause, and without the pause, the self can't reassemble. MPIT calls this the organizing gate, the moment in recovery where you stop running, stop performing, stop explaining, and start observing. Not judging, not fixing, just watching. Only in that pause can the fragmented self start to come back into view, and only in that pause can you even begin to feel safe. You're exhausted because you haven't had a moment just to be without fear. You're exhausted because you're not broken. You're loyal. This is maybe the most important part. You didn't fail to cope. You coped so well that it looked like strength to others. You didn't go crazy. You protected your true self the only way you could, by hiding it, splitting it, saving it. You didn't collapse because you're weak. You collapsed because you finally reached the end of what you could survive. Your exhaustion is not a flaw. It is a measure of your commitment to staying alive in a world that erased you. MPIT doesn't offer false hope. It offers truth. It names the parts of you that no one else could see. It gives language to the storm. It holds up a mirror that reflects not your wounds, but your loyalty to life. You are exhausted, yes, but not gone. And every time you speak your truth, even silently, even shakily, you are reassembling a self that was always waiting for your return. Peace out. Loads of love.